The forest outside Ashwell was not a place people walked into after dark. It had a reputation built over generations, not of monsters or curses, but of the quiet, heavy kind of danger that did not announce itself. The trees grew too close together there, the shadows pooled too deep, and the sounds that came from its edge at night were the kind that made sensible people pull their curtains and go back to bed. Rowan was not always sensible. He had spent 12 years as a field medic in the border wars, and those years had left him with two things he could not shake: a bad knee that predicted rain better than any weather chart, and the habit of walking at night when his thoughts got too loud. Sleep had never come easily to him. It came even less easily now that the wars were over and there was nothing to fill the silence they had left behind. He pulled his coat tighter and followed the tree line with his lantern held low. He was not looking for anything. He never was on these walks. He was just moving the way a man moves when standing still feels worse. He almost walked past it entirely. The hatchling was hidden beneath a collapsed root shelf at the base of a large oak, curled so tightly into itself that it barely registered as a living thing at first. Rowan stopped because his lantern caught a faint shimmer, the dull, exhausted gleam of scales that had lost most of their color. He crouched down slowly, the way he had learned to approach the badly wounded on the field, with patience and without sudden movements. It was small. Smaller than he had expected a dragon to be at this age. No larger than a medium dog, its wings not yet grown, its claws curled against its chest like it was trying to hold something inside itself. Its breath came in shallow pulls that were wet and uneven. Rowan had heard breathing like that before. It meant something important was damaged on the inside. He looked at the ground around it. The nest had been here. He could see the remains of it, scorched and scattered, the organic materials burned away with the kind of clean, surgical heat that natural fire did not produce. Relic hunters. He had seen their work before, near the border territories. They used suppression weapons specifically designed to prevent dragon fire from igniting, which meant the hatchling had not been able to fight back or call for help. Whatever had attacked the nest had been prepared and professional, and had left this one behind either by accident or because it was too small to bother with. Rowan set his lantern down beside him and looked at the hatchling for a long moment. He was not unaware of what clan law said about humans and unregistered contact with dragon young. Everyone in Ashwell knew the basic rule: you did not touch them, you did not approach them, and if you found one in distress you reported it to the nearest clan outpost and walked away. The clans were not cruel about it. They simply did not trust humans with their young, and they had enough history to justify that position. He picked the hatchling up anyway. It made a sound when he lifted it, not a cry exactly, more like the involuntary noise of something that had been bracing against pain for so long that being moved caught it off guard. It did not fight him. It did not have the strength to. It simply lay against his chest as he carried it back through the tree line, its small body radiating a heat that was feverish and wrong. He worked through the night. He had no dragon medicine because no such thing existed in a village like Ashwell, so he used what he had: clean water, wound dressings, the same slow and careful approach he had used on soldiers who were too far gone to be moved to a proper medical post. He cleaned the burns on the hatchling's left side, which were deep and dark-edged in the way that suppression weapon damage always was. He kept it warm. He kept it still. He talked to it quietly, not because he thought it understood him, but because silence felt unkind. The village elder arrived at his door the following morning. Her name was Edna, and she was not a dramatic woman, which was why the look on her face when he opened the door concerned him more than shouting would have. She told him clearly and without embellishment what the clan enforcers did to humans found in possession of unregistered hatchlings. She told him that 2 villages in the eastern region had lost homes over lesser offenses. She told him that she was not angry with him, that she understood how it had happened, but that the only reasonable course of action was to contact the clan outpost immediately and hand the creature over before anyone came looking. Rowan listened to all of it. He nodded at the appropriate moments. He thanked her for coming to him directly instead of going to the outpost herself. Then he closed the door and went back inside. The hatchling was awake. It had not managed to move, but its eyes were open, a deep, warm orange like the last of a fire that fully intended to keep burning. It watched him cross the room and lower himself into the chair beside its makeshift bed, and it did not look away. He decided in that moment that he would call her Ember. She blinked at him slowly. He nodded at her, the way he had nodded at young soldiers who had woken up after something terrible and needed someone to simply be present without making it worse. Outside, the forest was quiet. Inside, something small and stubborn breathed carefully in and out. Rowan stayed where he was. They came on the 11th day. Rowan had almost started to believe they would not come at all. Ember was eating properly by then, small pieces of salted meat that she took carefully from his hand, and the burns on her left side had closed enough that she could move without flinching. She had started following him from room to room, her small claws clicking on the stone floor, her orange eyes tracking everything he did with the focused attention of a creature that had decided he was the most important thing in her immediate world. He had started to feel something he had not felt in a long time. Something close to settled. Then the door came off its hinges. It did not break. It simply came away from the frame cleanly, lifted by a scaled hand the size of a dinner table, and set aside against the outer wall as though the enforcer was being polite about it. There were 3 of them. They filled the doorway in a way that made the cottage feel like a different building entirely, smaller, thinner walled, less permanent. Their scales were deep green and black, the colors of the senior enforcer caste, and they carried no visible weapons because they did not need any. Ember pressed herself against Rowan's leg immediately. He felt her trembling. The lead enforcer stepped inside. She had to lower her head to clear the doorframe, which she did without breaking her gaze from Rowan. When she straightened again, she looked at him the way experienced soldiers look at obstacles. Not with anger, but with the flat assessment of something that needs to be dealt with efficiently. She spoke first in the clan tongue. Rowan did not understand it, but the tone was clear enough. Then she switched to the common trade language, slowly, the way someone speaks to a person they expect to be difficult. "You are holding clan property," she said. "This is not a matter of negotiation. Surrender the hatchling and we will record your involvement as accidental. Resist and we will not." Rowan looked at her. Then he looked at the 2 enforcers behind her, who had positioned themselves at angles that covered the room's exits without being asked. Professional. Practiced. They had done this before. "She was dying in the forest," he said. "Her nest was destroyed by relic hunters. I found her alone." "That does not change what she is," the enforcer said. "No," Rowan agreed. "It changes what I did." The enforcer studied him for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes, not quite respect, but the recognition of a type she had encountered before. The kind of human who had already made their decision and was simply waiting for events to catch up. "Step away from the hatchling," she said. Ember made a sound against his leg. It was not a growl. It was quieter than that, and somehow worse, the sound of something very small that was very frightened and was trying very hard not to show it. Rowan did not step away. The lead enforcer raised her arm. What gathered in her palm was not ordinary fire. It was darker than that, heavy and concentrated, the kind of energy that suppression weapons were designed to mimic, a senior enforcer's killing strike, built to end things quickly and without complication. It was aimed past Rowan, directly at Ember. Later, Rowan would not be able to explain exactly what happened in his mind during the half-second that followed. There was no heroic thought. There was no calculation of odds or assessment of outcomes. There was only Ember trembling against his leg, and the thing coming toward her, and the very simple fact that his body was between the 2 of them. He did not step aside. The strike hit him across the chest like a wall falling on him. The force of it did not just knock him back, it took him completely off his feet and drove him through the rear wall of the cottage in an explosion of stone and timber, and he landed in the dirt of his back garden with the sky above him and no memory of how he had gotten there. Everything was very loud and then very quiet. He was aware, distantly, that he was badly hurt. His field medic's brain tried to begin its own assessment and got partway through before the rest of him declined to cooperate. His chest felt wrong in a way he did not have words for. The evening sky above him was the pale gray of approaching dusk and it was very still. Then Ember was there. He did not know how she had gotten past the enforcers. He did not know what had happened in the cottage in the seconds between the strike and her appearing above him, her small face close to his, her orange eyes enormous and frightened and furious all at once. She made a sound he had never heard her make before, low and continuous, something between a cry and a command. And then she breathed on him. The flame that came from her was nothing like what he expected dragon fire to be. It was not hot in the way that burns. It was warm in the way that a fever breaks, sudden and flooding and deeply, structurally relief. It moved into his chest the way warmth moves into cold hands, finding every damaged place and pressing against it. He felt something in him that had been very close to stopping decide to continue. He did not know how long it lasted. When he became aware of the world again, the garden was quiet. He turned his head slowly and looked at the broken wall of his cottage. The enforcers were standing just beyond it, all 3 of them motionless. The lead enforcer was watching Ember with an expression that Rowan, even in his current state, recognized clearly. She was not angry. She was afraid. They left without speaking. Without the hatchling. Without looking back. Ember pressed her warm head against Rowan's shoulder and did not move. He put his hand on her side and concentrated on breathing. He was unconscious for 9 days. Edna checked on him every morning, standing in the doorway of the cottage with her arms folded and her expression carefully neutral, the way people look when they are preparing themselves for bad news and trying not to show it. She had sent word to the clan outpost the morning after the enforcers left, not to report Rowan, but because what she had seen in that back garden had frightened her in a way she could not fully explain, and she felt that someone who understood dragons better than she did needed to know about it. Ember did not leave Rowan's side. She lay beside him on the floor of the cottage, her body pressed against his, her temperature steady and warm in the way that a banked fire is warm, controlled, deliberate, purposeful. The villagers who came to the doorway and looked in reported that the hatchling's chest glowed faintly when she breathed, and that the glow seemed to pulse in rhythm with Rowan's heartbeat. Nobody went inside. Nobody tried to move him. Whatever was happening between the man and the hatchling felt like the kind of thing that should not be interrupted. On the 4th day the scale scars appeared. They started at the center of his chest, where the enforcer's strike had hit him, and spread outward slowly over the following days like frost moving across glass. They were not wounds. The skin was not broken or raw. They were smooth and slightly raised, the same pale silver gray as Ember's underscales, and in the dark of the cottage at night they gave off a faint, steady light that had no business coming from a human body. Edna stood in the doorway on the 5th morning and looked at them for a long time. Then she went home and made tea and sat with the feeling that the world had just changed in a way that her village was not entirely prepared for. On the 9th day Rowan opened his eyes. He lay still for a long moment, looking at the ceiling of his cottage. The timber above him was familiar. The smell of the room was familiar. But everything else felt different in a way that was difficult to name. Sharper, somehow, as though someone had adjusted the world very slightly and everything in it was now more present than it had been before. He could hear Ember breathing beside him before he turned to look at her. He could feel the heat of the hearth fire on the other side of the room as a specific, distinct thing rather than a general warmth. He could sense, without knowing how, that there were 4 people standing on the road outside his cottage and that none of them were from the village. He sat up slowly. His chest did not hurt. That was the first thing that struck him as wrong because based on what he remembered of the strike, his chest should have been the end of him entirely. He looked down at the scars and watched them pulse once, quietly, in the dim morning light. Ember lifted her head and looked at him. Her orange eyes were calm. She made a low sound that was not quite any sound he had heard her make before, something between greeting and relief, with a weight to it that felt older than her age had any right to produce. "Good morning," he said because he did not know what else to say. She put her head back down on his knee. The knock at the repaired cottage door was unhurried and deliberate. Not the knock of someone who expected to be turned away, but not the knock of someone who intended to force their way in either. Rowan stood, steadily, which surprised him, and crossed the room and opened the door. The elder was alone. She was old by dragon standards, which meant she carried her age the way mountains carry theirs, not as weakness but as accumulated weight, as evidence of duration. Her scales were deep bronze, faded at the edges to something close to gold, and she was smaller than the enforcers had been, which somehow made her more difficult to look at directly. She held no weapon and wore no caste markings. She did not need either. She looked at Rowan's chest for a long moment. Then she looked at his eyes. "May I come in?" she said. It was not quite a question. He stepped aside. She moved to the center of the room and looked at Ember, who raised her head and held the elder's gaze with a steadiness that no hatchling her age should have possessed. Something passed between the two of them that Rowan could not read. Then the elder turned back to him. "Do you know what has happened to you?" she said. "No," Rowan said. "But I know I am different." She nodded slowly. "The last time this occurred, your kind had not yet built cities," she said. "It is called Dragonbound. It happens when a human being accepts a killing strike meant for clan young, and the young responds with a healing flame before the human dies, and the energies meet inside a body that was somehow capable of holding both without breaking." She paused. "Most bodies are not capable of that. We do not fully understand why some are." Rowan looked down at his hands. They looked the same as before. They felt the same as before. But when he focused, he could feel Ember's heartbeat as a separate and distinct thing inside his own chest, steady and warm and permanent. "What does it mean?" he asked. "It means you are no longer only what you were," the elder said simply. "And it means the council will want to speak with you. Not to punish. Not to take the hatchling." She looked at Ember again and something in her old bronze face softened very slightly. "To recognize." Rowan was quiet for a moment. Outside, the forest beyond Ashwell was bright with morning light, ordinary and unchanged. Inside, A man with glowing scars and a hatchling pressed against his legs stood at the beginning of something neither of them had planned for. He nodded once. "Then we will speak with the council," he said. The nursery moon had no name in the common trade language. The clans called it something that did not translate well, a word that meant roughly the place where the young are kept safe. It was a small moon, gray and quiet, orbiting a gas giant 3 systems away from the nearest clan outpost. It had been chosen specifically because it was unremarkable. Nothing valuable on the surface. No strategic position. No reason for anyone to look at it twice. That was the point. 43 hatchlings lived there under the care of 2 elder guardians who were old enough to be gentle and experienced enough to be watchful. The youngest hatchlings were barely a week out of their shells. The oldest were no bigger than Ember had been when Rowan found her in the forest outside Ashwell. Small, wingless, dependent, and completely unable to defend themselves against anything that arrived with serious intentions. The poacher fleet arrived with very serious intentions. There were 11 ships. Not large vessels by military standards but heavily modified, fitted with suppression field generators that could blanket a surface area and prevent dragon fire from igniting, and carrying enough containment equipment to process 43 hatchlings quickly and quietly and be gone before any clan response could reach them. They had done this before. For nursery sites in the past 2 years, all of them remote, all of them chosen by the same logic that had made this moon seem safe. The network was organized and patient and had so far operated without consequence. The fleet dropped out of transit speed and began its approach in standard formation. They had been in range for approximately 4 minutes when Ember came out of the dark on the fleet's port side and took the lead ship's engine housing off with one pass. She was not small anymore. The hatchling that Rowan had carried home in his coat 3 years ago was now 40 feet from nose to tail, her wingspan wider than the poacher ship's deck, her scales the deep burnished orange of a serious fire rather than the dull gray ash he had first found her in. She moved through open space the way she had always moved, with complete confidence in her own judgment and very little interest in what anyone else thought about it. Rowan was on her back. He wore no armor beyond the practical kind. Sealed suit, basic navigation, the energy reader built into his left gauntlet that he no longer strictly needed because his own senses had been doing the same job for 2 years now. He could feel the suppression fields the fleet was generating the moment they powered up, a dull pressure against the back of his skull like a headache arriving from the wrong direction. He could feel the heat signatures of every crew member on every ship. He could feel Ember's focus beneath him like a current, steady and building. The fleet scattered into a response formation. To their credit, they were fast about it. Ships peeled to flanking positions, suppression fields intensified, and the lead operator's voice came across the open channel in 3 languages telling Rowan and Ember to stand down or face immediate destruction. Rowan looked at the fleet spread out before them. He thought about 11 ships and 43 hatchlings and 2 elder guardians on a gray moon below them who had probably already moved the young ones as deep into the surface shelters as they could get. He leaned forward slightly and Ember banked left without being asked. What followed lasted 22 minutes. It was not a battle in the way that battles are usually described, with chaos and noise and moments that could not be predicted. It was more methodical than that. Rowan read the fleet's positions and energy outputs through his own senses and through the navigation system simultaneously, identifying the suppression field generators as the priority and feeding that information to Ember in the shorthand they had developed over 3 years of working together. She processed it the way she processed everything, immediately and without second-guessing, and moved accordingly. The suppression generators went first. Without them the fleet lost its primary advantage. Then the communication arrays so they could not call for reinforcement or warn the network. Then the engine systems, one by one, with the particular precision of someone who wanted the ships disabled rather than destroyed because disabled ships had crews that could be collected and questioned and the network had names that the clans had been trying to obtain for 2 years. 3 ships attempted to retreat. Ember let 2 of them go a specific distance before cutting off their route with a pass that left their hulls intact and their engines cold. The third she simply waited for because its trajectory told her where it was going before it got there, and she was already there when it arrived. When it was over the fleet sat in a loose and powerless cluster above the nursery moon, going nowhere, generating nothing, waiting for clan enforcement vessels that were already en route because Rowan had opened the channel to the nearest outpost at the start and left it open. He sat on Ember's back in the quiet that followed and looked at the disabled ships. She turned her head back toward him and regarded him with one large orange eye. "Yes," he said. "I know. You told me the third one would try to run right." She turned back around with the specific satisfaction of a creature who had been correct and felt no need to press the point further. Below them, on the surface of the gray moon, one of the Elder Guardians emerged from the shelter entrance and looked up. The distance was too great to read expressions. But she stood there for a long moment, looking up at the dragon and the scarred human on her back, before going back inside to the hatchlings who needed her. The poaching network received the report from the survivors 3 days later. They held a meeting. They looked at the footage from the fleet's external cameras. They looked at the damage reports. They looked at the list of crew members who had been collected by clan enforcement and were now talking very openly about names and locations and supply routes. Nobody suggested sending a second fleet. The nursery moon remained unnamed in the common trade language. It remained safe. The Dragon High Council met once every 50 years in a place that had no coordinates in any public navigation system. It was not hidden out of fear. It was hidden out of tradition, which among the dragon clans amounted to the same thing. The chamber itself was carved from the interior of an asteroid so old that its mineral composition did not match anything in the current star charts, and its walls had been marked over centuries by the claws of every elder who had ever sat in council there. The marks were not decorative. They were a record. Every decision, every recognition, every name that the council had chosen to remember. Rowan stood in the center of that chamber and tried not to look like a man who was thinking about how much rock was above his head. Ember stood beside him. She did not try to look like anything other than what she was. 40 feet of fully grown dragon with the patient stillness of a creature that had learned long ago that most situations resolved themselves if you simply waited with enough confidence. The council chamber had been built to accommodate dragons of her size, but only just, and the elders arranged in the curved rows above them looked at her with the particular attention reserved for things that have grown beyond initial expectations. There were 7 council members. The eldest had scales the color of old iron and eyes that had the quality of deep water, not cold exactly, but containing things that were not immediately visible. She had been on the council for longer than most human civilizations had existed, and she looked at Rowan the way someone looks at a word in an ancient text that they had not expected to encounter outside of historical documents. She spoke in the common trade language as a courtesy to him, which itself was a statement. "Dragonbound," she said. "The council has reviewed the events at the nursery moon. We have reviewed the events at Ashwell 3 years prior. We have reviewed your conduct in both." She paused. "We do not offer this recognition lightly. In the history of this council, it has been offered 4 times. You are the 5th. Rowan said nothing. He had learned, in 3 years of working alongside dragons, that silence was not emptiness to them. It was participation. "You will be recorded," the elder continued. "Not as a servant of the clans. Not as a symbol of human and dragon cooperation for the purposes of political convenience. As an equal. As dragon-bound. As a guardian in your own standing." She looked at Ember briefly. "Your bond is recognized as permanent and mutual. What she protects, the council protects. What you protect, the council protects." One of the other council members leaned forward. He was younger than the eldest by several centuries, his scales a dark red that had not yet faded to the softer tones of extreme age. He had the look of someone with a practical question. "The council would ask," he said carefully, "what you intend to do with this recognition." Rowan thought about it for a moment. "Go home," he said. The red-scaled elder blinked. It was the first time anything in the chamber had moved unexpectedly. "Home," he repeated. "To Ashwell," Rowan said. "The cottage needs a new back wall. It has needed one for 3 years. I have been putting it off." There was a silence in the chamber that had a different quality than the silences before it. The eldest council member looked at him for a long moment and then made a sound that took Rowan a moment to identify because he had never heard it from a dragon elder before. She was laughing. It was quiet and brief and she stopped it quickly, but it had been real. She pressed one scaled hand flat against the ancient marked wall of the chamber and composed herself and looked at him with something in her deep water eyes that had not been there at the beginning of the meeting. "The record will show," she said, "that the 5th dragon-bound, upon recognition, requested to return home and repair his house." "It is a good house," Rowan said. He went home. The cottage took 2 weeks to repair properly, with Ember doing the heavy lifting in the most literal sense and Rowan doing the finish work with the particular care of a man who intended the result to last. The village of Ashwell received him back without ceremony, which was exactly what he wanted. Edna brought food on the first evening and sat with him on the repaired step and did not ask about the council or the nursery moon or the things that had been spreading through the galactic news channels for the past several weeks. She asked if the knee was still predicting rain. He said it was. She nodded and went home. But the galaxy did not go quiet around him the way he went quiet within it. The name Dragonbound moved through clan networks and trade channels and the darker corners of the communication systems where poaching networks and warlord factions monitored things they considered relevant to their continued operation. The footage from the nursery moon had circulated widely, a scarred human on the back of a massive dragon, dismantling a fleet with the unhurried efficiency of someone completing a task they had already finished in their head before it began. The warlord factions held meetings. The remaining poaching networks updated their risk assessments. Independent operators who worked the remote nursery corridors began routing around anything that fell within 3 systems of a known clan site. Not because Rowan had threatened anyone. Not because the council had issued warnings. But because the galaxy had looked at what he had done and understood something important about him. He had no ambition to satisfy, no territory to defend, no reputation he was trying to build. He wanted nothing for himself. He had a cottage and a repaired back wall and a dragon who slept in his garden and made the surrounding forest feel very safe and very permanently occupied. A man who wants nothing and protects everything is the most dangerous kind. The hatchling nests across 3 star systems stayed quiet. Ember slept in the garden with one eye open. Rowan fixed the back wall and made tea and listened to the forest and let the galaxy be afraid of him at whatever distance made it comfortable. It was, he thought, a reasonable arrangement.